Level 989.
Welcome to a 989 on Health Extra. These quick supplements should help ease any withdrawal symptoms you may experience while waiting for our next full episode. So, Mike, what's on today's agenda?
As you may have gathered by now, I like words. There's a phenomenon called the frequency illusion. It's also called by some the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, a flavor of cognitive bias where, once you learn about something, you start noticing that something everywhere you go. A common instance of this would be you buy a new VW Beetle, and suddenly you notice VW Beetles all over your environment. Punch buggy! And like any coincidence, the more you notice something, the more you notice something. A few days ago, I read an article from Georgia Tech research about something called the vagus nerve. Now, I'm just a regular Joe, so my pronunciation's not on point with the Latin and the specificity and such. It may sound as if I'm saying Vegas, as in Las Vegas, my wife's favorite vacation destination, but this is a science word, not a place in Nevada. Also, I'm not trying to refer to Vega, a star in the far reaches of outer space, in the constellation of Lyra, in fact. The vagus nerve, that's V-A-G-U-S, is the longest nerve in the body, and it emerges from the human brain, from the medulla oblongata specifically. The vagus nerve has a lot of important functions, including muscles of the mouth and throat, also has a big role in heart rate and blood pressure, even has some effects on insulin and blood sugar. It's a very important nerve. So, the article from Georgia Tech research I mentioned earlier, the article will, of course, be linked in the show notes. The researchers describe their new findings, which involves carefully stimulating the vagus nerve in a very specific way. As you might guess, we humans have been using electricity to stimulate nerves for a long time now. But for the most part, it's been a pretty crude application. When you zap a nerve, you get electricity flowing in all sorts of directions. A nerve isn't a copper wire. It's a complex mesh or web, and stimulation is difficult to target and focus in just the desired directions. The new approach described in the Georgia Tech article carefully blocks stimulation in the unwanted directions, focusing the desired effects where they'll do the most good. In this instance, the researchers were able to demonstrate a reduction in the body's inflammatory or hyperactive immune responses, the sort of out-of-control body issues like chronic fatigue, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, even lupus. Now, these researchers aren't claiming to have cured MS or any of these issues, but in their studies, their specific stimulation of the vagus nerve reduced inflammatory response in the body. It's just another puzzle piece in working out how these disorders work and how we can approach resolving them. Okay, so that's interesting and all, but how often do you hear news about the vagus nerve? Almost never, right? So imagine my surprise when later that same day, I found a new article at CNN.com talking about a completely unrelated story where the vagus nerve in a young boy may have freaked out and stopped his heart. Turns out the young fella has a rare inherited heart issue called Brugada syndrome, which can result in arrhythmia and a high risk for sudden death. And you can be asymptomatic with Brugada syndrome, which means you will have no idea until you just drop dead one day. Fun. And this heart issue can kick in at random, anytime from infancy. It's one of the possible causes of sudden infant death syndrome, or around age 40. Now, there are genetic tests that will reveal Brugada syndrome, so if your family has a history of sudden drop-deadedness from heart issues, you might want to get checked out. According to the article at CNN, the boy in the story had taken a large bite of a hot dog, experienced a few moments of choking, which stimulated his vagus nerve and triggered an abnormal heart rhythm that caused his heart to stop. Now, don't you worry, he was brought back, he's doing fine. Now, in my quick bit of research across the more credible medical sites like the National Institutes of Health, I could not find any references to what might trigger or otherwise cause the sudden death in Brugada syndrome to strike. It can't just be fast living and bad food. I mean, a baby in the crib isn't eating a lot of fancy food, drinking alcohol, or enjoying a stogie, so there must be other triggers. It's not really clear how the CNN story about the connection between the hot dog and the sudden arrhythmia was made so decisively. I mean, you could logically connect that a sudden stressor could do it, or perhaps foods high in electrolytes like salt or potassium could play into it, maybe impact the heart. Remember, the vagus nerve also does a lot of work in the mouth and throat. Brugada syndrome was confirmed for the little guy through genetic testing, and it turns out, after scanning the whole clan, the boy's brother was also revealed to have the troublesome gene. Overall, I found these vagus stories coincidental and fascinating, but left me wanting more. I'll be interested to see how this technology goes forward. In the story about the boy and the hot dog, he ended up with an implanted defibrillator. That's a pretty invasive procedure and a large implant for a 9-year-old boy. I wonder if, in the future, a far smaller implant mediating impulses from his vagus nerve might become the standard treatment for these sorts of issues.
That's all for now. You can find links to read more about today's topics at level989.com. Why not take a moment to rate or review us in iTunes, or give us a mention on social media? We can't help everyone if they don't know we exist. Don't rely on us as an alternative to medical advice from a professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website. Thanks for listening, and now, go health yourself.